In the autumn of 2019, on the scales at the Red River Valley Co-op, Elara Vance's corn yield was certified at 204.7 bushels per acre. The county average for the genetically modified corn every one of her neighbors grew was 98.2. Her corn was grown from seed her grandfather had saved in 1946, from a variety no one had a commercial name for anymore. His corn was grown without a single drop of patented herbicide or insecticide. The number, 204.7, was not a miracle. It was the result of a 73-year-long conversation between a family and a piece of land. This is the story of why that conversation mattered. Let me tell you about the farm. It was 480 acres of what the soil maps called Foreman-Osdahl loam, which was a technical way of saying it was dark, rich, and unforgiving. It was purchased by Elara's grandfather, Samuel Vance, in March of 1946 for $112 an acre, with money he had saved while working on a B-24 Liberator assembly line in San Diego during the war. He was 26 years old and had never owned anything more than a 1938 Ford pickup. The land had been worked hard and then abandoned during the Dust Bowl. The topsoil was thin, the ditches were eroded, and the neighbors, who were farming bigger and bigger parcels, gave him 2 years, maybe 3. Samuel was a quiet man, known for listening more than he spoke, a habit he'd picked up from his father, who was a trapper. He walked the 480 acres for 3 weeks before he ever put a plow to it. He learned its contours, where the water pooled after a rain, where the morning sun hit first, where the wind scoured the earth bare in the winter. He didn't have money for the new hybrid seeds that were just starting to come out of the universities, the ones that promised uniform height and predictable yields. So he drove 200 miles south to a small Menominee community where his grandmother had been born, and he traded a cured ham and $10 for a bushel of corn. It wasn't yellow dent corn.
It was a motley collection of kernels. Some were deep amber, some were pale yellow, some had streaks of red like a wound. The elders called it opique, the river corn. They told him it was good for 2 things, lean years and listening. They said it remembered the droughts of the 1700s and the wet springs of the 1800s. Samuel didn't know about all that. He just knew it was what he could afford. He planted his first crop that spring, by hand, with a check row planter pulled by 2 mules he'd bought for $50. His yield that first year was 38 bushels an acre. The men in the co-op who were using the new hybrids got 50. They shook their heads, but Samuel hadn't paid $12 a bag for his seed. His seed had been free. And that was the beginning of the practice, and the end of every harvest, before the combines ever touched the fields. Samuel would walk the rows. He spent a week doing this. He was looking for the mothers, the stalks that would provide the seed for the next year.
He had a rule, one he would later teach his son, and his son would teach Elara. The rule was, save the best, but also save the strange. He would select the 100 largest, healthiest, most perfect ears from the strongest stalks. These were the best. They were the genetic bedrock, the promise of a good harvest in a good year. He would tie a red piece of twine around them. Then he would look for the outliers. The stalk that was a foot shorter than its neighbors, but had produced a full ear anyway. The one that grew in the hard-pan clay at the edge of the field where nothing else thrived. The ear that had 12 rows of kernels instead of the usual 16. The one that ripened 2 weeks early or 2 weeks late. These were the strange. He tied them with blue twine. The best, he explained to his son, is for the world you have. The strange is for the world that is coming. The best gives you a harvest. The strange gives you a future. He stored the seed not in metal bins or plastic buckets, but in heavy canvas bags that his wife sewed from old sailcloth he'd bought as war surplus. The bags breathed. They kept the seed dry, but not too dry, cool, but not frozen. Each bag was marked with the year and the field it came from. By the time Elara took over the farm in 1985, there were 39 of these bags in the cool, dark cellar of the farmhouse, a silent library of genetic memory. Elara Vance was 34 years old when her father passed the farm to her. She had been farming it alongside him for 16 years. She was known for her steady hands and an unnerving ability to predict the weather by watching the behavior of crows. She continued the practice. Every September she walked the fields. She selected the best, and she selected the strange. The world around her was changing. Her neighbors were signing contracts with Pioneer and DeKalb. Their fields became perfect monocultures, every stalk the same height, every ear ripening on the same day. Their yields climbed from 100 bushels an acre to 120, then 150. They bought bigger combines, bigger tractors. They took on more debt. Elara's yields stayed steady, around 110, maybe 115 in a good year. Her corn wasn't uniform. In a single row, you could find stalks that were 7 feet tall next to stalks that were 9 feet tall. The ears were all different sizes and shades of amber and yellow. It looked messy. It looked inefficient. The bankers would come by every few years and try to get her to modernize. They'd show her spreadsheets, amortization tables, profit and loss projections. They'd point to her neighbours' new grain bins, their shiny green John Deere equipment. Elara would serve them coffee at the same oak table her grandfather had built in 1947 and listen politely. She would thank them for their time. She would show them the door. She never took a loan. The farm had been debt-free since 1958, and she intended to keep it that way. Her profit margins were smaller than her neighbors, but her input costs were a fraction of theirs. She didn't buy seed. She didn't buy the expensive patented chemicals the new seeds required. Her fertilizer was manure from a small herd of cattle and a cover crop of clover and vetch she plowed under every third spring. Her grandfather's corn, after decades of selection on that specific 480 acres, had developed deep roots that could find moisture and nutrients far below the reach of the modern hybrids. It had developed a symbiotic relationship with the mycorrhizal fungi unique to her soil. It was, in a word, home. The first real test came in the drought of 1988. It was the worst in 50 years. The rain stopped in May and didn't start again until September. Temperatures stayed above 100 degrees for 45 straight days. All over the county, the hybrid corn tasseled early, stunted and sterile. The leaves fired, turning a sickly yellow-brown from the bottom up. Fields that were projected to yield 160 bushels an acre yielded 40, or 20, or nothing. It was a catastrophe. Farmers lost their land, the same land their grandfathers had homesteaded. The suicide hotline in the county seat had its busiest year on record. Elara's field suffered too. Her corn looked stressed. The leaves curled in on themselves during the day to conserve moisture. But it didn't die. Her grandfather, remembering the stories of the 30s, had bred for deep roots. The quote one he'd save were often the plants that survived in the driest parts of the field. That genetic memory was still in the seed. While her neighbor's corn, bred for shallow, dense planting and heavy irrigation, saw its roots bake in the top 6 inches of soil, Elara's corn sent roots down 3, 4, even 5 feet, chasing the deep moisture. That year, her yield was 85 bushels an acre. It was a financial loss, but not a crippling one. The county average was 32. She survived. Many did not. After that, the neighbors stopped making jokes about her Indian corn. They didn't understand it, but they respected it. For a time. But memory in agriculture is short. Good rains returned, commodity prices went up, and the next wave of technology arrived. In the late 1990s, it was Roundup-ready corn. Then came the BT corn, genetically engineered to produce its own insecticide. The company that sold it was called AgriCorp, a massive conglomerate that had swallowed up dozens of smaller seed companies. Their representative for Red River Valley County was a young man named Marcus Thorne. Let me tell you about Marcus Thorne. He was not a villain. He was 34 years old, had a master's degree in agronomy from Iowa State University, and he genuinely believed he was helping farmers. He was confident, articulate, and good at his job. He arrived at Elara's farm on a Tuesday morning in April of 2012, driving a brand new white Ford F-150 with the AgriCorp logo on the door. He was wearing a clean, pressed polo shirt and expensive work boots that had never seen mud. Elara's grandnephew Liam was there that day. Liam was 22, had just finished a 2-year business degree at the community college, and was spending the summer helping on the farm. He was a good kid, but he was impatient. He saw the hard work, the long hours, and the modest returns, and he thought there had to be a better way. Marcus spread his glossy brochure on Elara's oak kitchen table. It was filled with charts, graphs, and pictures of perfect, uniform ears of yellow corn against a bright blue sky. "This is our new Yield Max 7200 triple stack," he said, pointing to the centerfold. "It has the Roundup Ready 2 gene for weed control, the Herculex 1 gene for rootworm protection, and the Yield Guard VT gene for corn borer. It's a complete package."
Elara looked at the pictures. The cobs were identical, like they'd been turned on a lathe. She slid the brochure back across the table. "My corn knows this soil," she said. Marcus smiled, a patient, practiced smile. "I understand the attachment to tradition, Miss Vance, I really do. But we're talking about a guaranteed 15% yield increase in the first year. We have data from over 10,000 test plots across the Midwest. It's drought-tolerant, pest-resistant, and designed for minimal tillage. It will save you time, fuel, and labor. It will make you more money." Liam was leaning forward, his eyes wide. He looked at the charts, then at his great-aunt. "How much is the seed?" Elara asked. "It's $345 a bag," Marcus said. "But we offer 0% financing for the first year through our partnership with Farm Credit. And with the savings on herbicides and insecticides, your net input cost will actually be lower." He tapped a column of numbers on the brochure. "It's all right here. Predictability, profitability."
It's the future of farming. Elara was quiet for a long moment. She looked out the window at the field her grandfather had first ploughed with 2 mules. Then she looked at the young man in the clean polo shirt. "That's not insurance," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "That's a lease. You're leasing your harvest from a laboratory in St. Louis. Every year you have to go back to them and pay again. My seed pays me." Marcus's smile tightened. "Miss Vance, with all due respect, you can't save the seed from our hybrids. The genetic traits are proprietary. And the second-generation yield drop-off would be significant anyway." "I know," said Elara. "That's the point." Liam looked from his aunt to the salesman, a knot of frustration in his stomach. He saw the logic in Marcus's presentation. He saw the numbers. He saw the future. He saw his aunt, whom he loved, as a relic, a stubborn old woman standing in the way of progress. He didn't say anything, but Elara saw the look in his eyes. It was the same look she'd seen in the banker's eyes for 30 years. Over the next few years, every other farmer in the county who hadn't already switched over made the change. AgriCorp's Yield Max series became the only corn you'd see for 100 miles in any direction. The fields were unnervingly clean. Not a single weed grew between the perfectly spaced rows. The yields were fantastic. In 2013, a year with perfect rainfall and a long, mild autumn, a neighbor of Elara's, a man named Tom Gunderson, hit 220 bushels an acre. The news was in the local paper. Marcus Thorne was quoted, talking about the power of genetic engineering. Tom Gunderson bought a new combine for $600,000. Liam cut the article out and taped it to the refrigerator in Elara's kitchen. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Elara's yield that year was 125 bushels an acre. A good year for her, but nowhere near 220. The pressure mounted. Liam argued with her. He made spreadsheets. He showed her the potential profits. "We could clear an extra $100,000 a year, Aunt Elara. We could fix the barn roof. We could take a vacation." "What happens when the price of your seed goes up?" she asked him one evening. "It won't," he said. "They have competitors." "What happens when the weeds become resistant to the Roundup?" "They'll invent a new chemical," he said, his voice full of the certainty of youth. "And what happens when the rootworms develop a tolerance to your special corn?" "They'll engineer a new gene. That's how progress works." "No," she said, turning to face him. "That's not progress. That's an arms race, and the house always wins." She took him down to the cellar.
She lit the single bare bulb that hung from a cord. The 70-odd canvas bags were lined up on wooden shelves, a dusty, silent congregation. She picked one up. It was labeled 1988, North Field. "This is the seed from the drought year," she said, her voice softening. "Half the plants in that field died, but the other half survived." This seed remembers that. It holds the memory of that heat, that thirst. It passed that memory on to its children. Your spreadsheet doesn't have a column for memory, Liam. He didn't understand. He wanted to. But he couldn't see past the numbers, past the gleaming new machinery his friends' families were buying. He stopped arguing, but a quiet resentment settled between them. He loved her, but he thought she was throwing his future away for a sentimental attachment to a bag of old corn. The years from 2014 to 2018 were average. Decent rains, normal temperatures. The AgriCorp corn performed as advertised. The county yields hovered around 170 to 180 bushels an acre. Elara's yield stayed in the 120s. The financial gap widened. Tom Gunderson bought another 200 acres. Other neighbors expanded, taking on more debt to finance the land and the expensive inputs the new corn demanded. Marcus Thorne was promoted to regional manager. He stopped making sales calls himself, but his protégés did, and they always skipped Elara's farm. She was a lost cause, a historical footnote. In the local farming community, she was regarded with a kind of affectionate pity. Good old Elara, stubborn as a mule, still farming like it's 1950. Then came 2019. It started with a wet, cold spring. The planting window was dangerously short. Farmers had to get their seed in the ground in a matter of days between punishing rainstorms. The soil was cold and compacted. The uniform genetics of the Yield Max 7200 corn were optimized for a perfect planting window for warm, friable soil. In the cold, wet ground, germination was poor. Across the county, farmers had to replant thousands of acres, a massive, unbudgeted expense at $345 a bag for seed, plus fuel and labor. Elara's corn, with its diverse genetic heritage, was different. Some of her seeds, descendants of those that had ripened early, germinated quickly in the brief warm spells. Others, descendants of those that had ripened late, waited patiently for the soil to warm properly. Her field didn't sprout all at once in perfect uniform rows. It came up in staggered waves, a messy, uneven greening. It looked like a failure. Liam was beside himself with anxiety. He walked the fields, comparing their patchy stands to Tom Gunderson's perfect, replanted rows. He thought they were ruined. Elara remained calm. She watched the crows. She watched the sky. She waited. "It's just waking up on its own time," she told him. Then the rain stopped. It stopped on June 10th, and it did not rain again, not a drop. July was hot and dry. August was brutal. The temperature hit 95 degrees and stayed there for 3 weeks. The rich, dark loam of Red River Valley County baked under the relentless sun, cracking into a hard, gray crust. Let me tell you about corn roots. The Yield Max 7200, like most modern hybrids, was bred to be planted in high-density populations, 34,000 plants per acre. To do this, its root system was designed to be compact and shallow, drawing heavily on the chemical fertilizers and moisture in the top 12 inches of soil. It was a sprinter, designed for a quick, explosive uptake of resources in ideal conditions. Elara's corn was planted at a lower density, 26,000 plants per acre. It was a marathon runner. Over 73 years of her grandfather's rule, save the best, but also save the strange. It had been selected for survival in this specific place. The strange plants that had survived the drought of 1988 and other smaller dry spells had passed on their genetic predisposition for deep rooting. By mid-August, the county was in a panic. The Yield Max corn, which had looked so perfect in June, began to fail, and it failed spectacularly. Its shallow roots had exhausted the moisture in the topsoil. The plants began to cannibalize themselves, drawing nitrogen from their lower leaves, which turned yellow, then brown. The stalks grew weak. The ears, if they formed at all, were small and poorly pollinated, with kernels missing in scattered, desperate patterns.
The high-density planting that produced such incredible yields in a good year now became a liability, as 34,000 plants per acre fought each other for the last drops of water. It was the 1988 drought all over again, but worse, because the stakes were so much higher. The debt was bigger. The cost of inputs was astronomical. The farmers had put all their chips on a single high-performance number, and that number was coming up snake eyes. Tom Gunderson, the man who had hit 220 bushels an acre 6 years earlier, was looking at a total crop failure. His $600,000 combine sat in its shed. He was talking to his banker every day. He wasn't sleeping. On Elara's farm, something different was happening. Her corn was suffering, yes. The leaves curled during the hottest part of the day, but it was not dying.
Deep in the earth, far below the cracked and baking surface, the diverse root systems of her grandfather's corn were doing what they had learned to do over 73 years. They were reaching, exploring, following the faint channels of moisture deep into the subsoil. Some roots went down 5 feet, 6 feet, tapping into a reserve of water the hybrids couldn't touch. The plants were not uniform. Some were tall and green, others were shorter, sacrificing height for survival. But they were all alive. They were all forming ears, pollinating, filling their kernels. They were drawing on the memory of 1988, of 1956, of all the dry years that Samuel Vance had walked the fields, looking for the survivors, for the strange ones who knew how to wait. Liam walked the fields with her now, not with frustration, but with a dawning, humbling sense of awe. He knelt and dug into the soil between the rows with his bare hands. It was dust for the first 10 inches. Then, miraculously, it grew cool and damp.
He could feel the life in it. He looked at his great-aunt, at her weathered face and calm eyes, and for the first time, he began to understand that the farm's ledger was not kept only in dollars and cents. It was kept in the living memory of the seed. Harvest came in late September. It was a somber affair across the county. The combines rolled through fields of withered stalks, collecting nubbins. The mood at the Red River Valley Co-op was funereal. Farmers brought in their loads, weighed them, and left with grim faces, the scale tickets representing a year of loss. The average yield was coming in under 100 bushels an acre, a disaster for anyone with a mortgage. On a Thursday morning, Elara and Liam drove their old 1988 International grain truck to the co-op. It was the only truck of its kind in the line of gleaming new Peterbilts and Kenworths. A group of farmers, including Tom Gunderson, were standing near the scales, drinking coffee from styrofoam cups.
They watched as Elara pulled onto the platform. There was no mockery in their eyes today, only a tired curiosity. The scale operator, a man named Dave who had worked there for 40 years, leaned out of his window. He looked at the digital readout. He blinked. He looked again. He checked to make sure the truck was fully on the scale. He pressed a button on his console to re-zero it and weigh it again. The same numbers came up. The farmers standing nearby grew quiet. They could see something was happening. Dave leaned back out of the window, not looking at Elara, but at the ticket printing out of his machine. He held it up. "Elara," he said, his voice carrying in the still autumn air. "What is this?" Liam got out of the truck and walked over. He took the ticket. He looked at the gross weight, the tare weight, and the moisture content, and then at the final number calculated by the co-op's computer, the one that mattered. 204.7. He walked back to the truck, his footsteps the only sound in a suddenly silent parking lot. Tom Gunderson put his coffee cup down on the bumper of a pickup. He stared at the ticket in Liam's hand. He stared at Elara, sitting in the cab of her old truck. He stared at the golden river of her strange, motley corn pouring from the auger into the receiving pit. He didn't look angry or jealous. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Liam handed the ticket to his great-aunt. She glanced at the number, gave a small, slow nod, and tucked it into the glove compartment next to a pair of worn leather work gloves and a map of the county from 1962. The aftermath was quiet, but profound. There was no victory party, no celebration. Elara's quiet triumph was a mirror that showed everyone else what they had lost, and not just in terms of money. They had traded resilience for efficiency. They had traded their own hard-won knowledge for a salesman's promise.
They had traded their freedom for a lease. The next spring, Tom Gunderson came to see her. He was 58 years old, had been farming for 40 years, and was known for his pride. He stood on her porch, his hat in his hands. He looked 10 years older than he had a year ago. He had managed to restructure his debt with the bank, but he had lost the 200 acres he'd just bought. He was back where he started, but with a much bigger hole to climb out of. "Elara," he said, "I was wondering, if you could spare it, I'd like to try planting a field of your corn next year. Just a small one, 40 acres. Elara invited him in for coffee. She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't lecture him. She listened. An hour later, he left with a canvas bag in the back of his pickup. It was heavy with 50 pounds of seed corn. It was marked 2019 South Field. It was a gift. There was no charge. Soon, others came. One by one, then in small groups, the farmers of Red River Valley County made the pilgrimage to Elara Vance's farm. They came with questions. They came with apologies disguised as talk about the weather. They left with canvas bags of seed. Elara gave it freely. Her grandfather had received it as a gift, and she would pass it on as one. She told them the rule: save the best, and also save the strange. She taught them how to walk the rows, how to look, how to listen to what the corn was telling them. Liam never went back to his business textbooks. He stayed on the farm. He learned the rhythm of the seasons, the language of the crows. He took over the week-long walk through the fields in September, his eye now trained to see not just the perfect ears, but the odd ones, the survivors, the keepers of the future. He learned the weight and feel of the canvas bags, the smell of the cool, dark cellar where the memory of 73 harvests was stored. Marcus Thorne was transferred to a desk job in Des Moines. The official reason was a promotion. The unofficial reason was that his predictive models, his 10,000 test plots, his entire data-driven worldview had been shattered by a 78-year-old woman and her grandfather's corn. The logic of the system he represented was flawless, except when it encountered a reality it had not been programmed to understand. The system was designed to maximize yield in a predictable world. It had no answer for a world that refused to be predictable. What Elara Vance and her grandfather had cultivated was not just a variety of corn, it was a different kind of wealth. It was not the wealth of accumulation, of bigger, faster, more. It was the wealth of resilience. It was the understanding that true abundance does not come from imposing a single, perfect idea onto the land, but from nurturing the land's own genius for variety, for adaptation, for surprise. The single number on the scale ticket in 2019 was not the point. It was merely the proof. The point was the quiet, patient, multi-generational work that made the number possible. We are taught to chase the single, optimized solution, the one right answer, the perfect algorithm. But a field of perfect, identical plants is a field on the edge of collapse. A system with no room for the strange, the inefficient, the unexpected, is a system with no future. Resilience is not a number. It is the repository of possibilities. It is the wisdom that remembers drought in a season of rain. It is the knowledge that what saves you is not the strength you have today, but the answer you saved for a question you have not yet been asked.